Channel 2 and the American River Conservancy present the series A Place Called Wakamatsu Farm.
This is land that has supported and continues to support many crops, cattle, and native plants and animals. This is Wakamatsu Farm. We are all immigrants in a potpourri of races that comprises the United States. Even the Native Americans, the first Americans, arrived from a different continent 40,000 years ago. The Japanese movement toward the United States started in the 1800s. There were a handful of shipwrecked sailors reaching the West Coast before 1860. Then a small number of students were sent by the shogun to study in the eastern universities of the United States to learn Western technology. It was in 1869 when the first organized group from Japan arrived in the foothills of El Dorado County, California, to establish a settlement. They were not fortune seekers seeking riches to take back home. These pioneers were seeking a new home. The immigrants from Aizu Wakamatsu were refugees from a brutal civil war that upended the life they had known. There were 20 to 30 in the group, ranging from carpenters to farmers, homemakers to samurai. Their Prussian leader, John Henry Schnell, had brought along all the staples needed to achieve success in the new land. Thousands of mulberry trees and silkworms to establish a silk-making empire, millions of tea seeds to create a thriving tea farm, fruit trees, bamboo, rice to plant, wax and paper plants, and the kayaki tree.
The story of these pioneers remained hidden for many years. Little remains to remind us of their hopes and dreams that lasted for only 2 years. This kayaki tree, a Japanese elm, is the only known living reminder. It was planted after the colonists arrived, probably as a reminder of home and the symbol of their culture that they wished to establish in this new land. The kayaki tree, whose scientific name is Zelkova serrata, with its beautiful grain, is still used in Japan to make useful items like furniture and bowls. It is the official tree of Fukushima Prefecture, where Aizu Wakamatsu is located, and kayaki trees are the subject of many legends in Japan.
Wakamatsu Farm is a cultural heritage site located in the rolling foothills of Placerville, California. Our site is listed on both the state and national registers of historic places as a site of national significance. We believe here at ARC that this is the first site of the Japanese colony located in the United States, and as a part of that colony, we believe that this site, in this farmhouse, was the location of the birthplace of the first Japanese American birthright citizen. It is also the final resting place of the first Japanese immigrant woman to have died and be buried on U.S. soil.
In 1969, the site was dedicated by then-Governor Ronald Reagan during a centennial celebration attended by thousands of people. The monument, recognizing Wakamatsu Tea and Silk Farm as a historic landmark, is in an area between Gold Trail School and Wakamatsu Farm. It recognizes that the colonists were the first agricultural settlement of pioneer Japanese immigrants and marks the beginning of Japanese influence on the agricultural economy of California. It is kept up by the Sacramento JACL. The next stop is the inside of the farmhouse. When you enter the farmhouse, you will find that the first floor is dedicated to the history of the Wakamatsu colony. In what was part of the kitchen dining area, there is a Japanese-American timeline.
The story of the Wakamatsu colony begins at the end of the last great civil war in Japan, the Boshin War. The war pitted northern forces of shogun supporters against southern rebels who wanted to end the shogun's rule. The 250-year-long rule of the shogun, called the Edo period, was threatened when Commodore Matthew Perry's gunships appeared in Edo Bay in 1853. Perry demanded opening of Japanese ports and an end to the shogun's isolation policy. With no power to combat Perry's gunships, the shogun government submitted and signed the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854. This action set off rebels in Japan to despise this capitulation to the foreigners. Under the cry of Sonojoi, rid the barbarians and restore the emperor, they attacked shogun forces and their supporters, setting off the Boshin War. The rebels from the south crushed the northern forces and ultimately approached the castle town of Aizu Wakamatsu, the last shogun's stronghold. Without modern weapons, the Aizu castle fell in 1868 after a month-long siege that included daily bombardments from modern U.S. Civil War cannons. In the aftermath of the defeat, Lord Matsudaira Katamori of Aizu gave John Henry Schnell finances to establish a refugee colony in America, the Wakamatsu colony. Schnell had been an arms merchant who had helped Aizu in the supporting Northern Alliance. As the last shogun's supporters were defeated in 1869, Schnell gathered his supplies, a number of Aizu samurai, craftsmen, and laborers, and left for America.
As you leave the timeline, there are archival photos on the walls of the living room area. Each one tells its own story. Some we're confident about, others need more research. Here are some of the stories discovered by our docent researchers.
The work to establish the Wakamatsu colony soon began. Hundreds of thousands of tea plants and thousands of mulberry trees were planted in the adjoining field. Rice was planted. A pond was dug, lined with lime and stocked with fish. They found time to display tea plants, silk cocoons, and oil plants at the California State Fair in Sacramento. In the following year, they caused a stir at the San Francisco Horticultural Fair when they won a first prize gold medal for their tea display. Around 1870, they decided to record their success with portraits taken at a Placerville studio. These 11 photographs, handed down through generations of Verkamp descendants, are among the earliest known photographs of Japanese pioneers in America. We can only speculate as to their names. When the colony failed after 2 years, some returned to Japan to share their stories and knowledge with that awakening country. Some chose to remain to become the first American Issei. In 2014, Naori Shiraishi, a junior high school student from Tokyo, contacted American River Conservancy to find information about her ancestor, Matsugoro Oto. She had discovered his story while doing a summer school project about her family roots. She learned that he had been to America as a Wakamatsu colonist, then had returned to Japan and then used the knowledge he had learned to become a pioneer in Japanese winemaking. Matsugoro was even hired as a wine expert for the Morita family, which would become famous for the Sony brand. Naori's belief is that this 1870 portrait is of Matsugoro, his wife Miwa, and infant daughter Yoshi. Continuing on with her family's pioneer heritage, Naori decided to study abroad in England and was a guest of honor at the recent Wakamatsu 150-year festival. This is believed to be a portrait of Wakamatsu colonist Kuninosuke Masamizu. Kuni was a skilled carpenter who went on to build many homes throughout the Coloma region. One was the Vineyard House, an important historic hotel that still stands today. Kuni married the daughter of an African-American man and his Native American wife. His legacy continued in Sacramento, where he used his language skills as an interpreter for the courts. He also helped recent immigrants to America. He ultimately died alone in a boarding house in Colusa, California in 1915. Many years later, the Japanese community honored this pioneer with a stone marker for his grave. Kuni's descendants have been honored guests of American River Conservancy, including at the Wakamatsu 150-year festival. This 1870 portrait is likely that of colonist leader John Henry Schnell. Schnell was a Prussian arms merchant who supplied weapons to Aizu and the Northern Alliance during the Boshin War. Lord Matsudaira honored him by making him a samurai and allowing him to marry the daughter of a samurai family. In 1869, Schnell brought 22 colonists and supplies to start the Wakamatsu colony. Shortly after their arrival, his wife gave birth to Francis, the first Japanese born on American soil. Facing financial hardship, Schnell abandoned the effort he had started, and he and his family were never heard from again. This portrait is believed to be John Henry Schnell and two important members of the Wakamatsu colony. The seated man is thought to be Tomoki Nishikawa, a young Northern Alliance samurai. Nishikawa would continue his journey in America after the Wakamatsu colony. In 1872, he joined the Japanese ambassador mission that arrived in America and went to Boston to be an interpreter for Japanese students at Harvard University. He would return to Japan to work for the government and then retired to Kobe to live to an old age. Several families were at the Wakamatsu colony, including the young couple in this portrait. One couple was Sakichi Yanagazawa and his wife Nami. Sakichi was a carpenter at the colony. The couple returned to Japan to raise their family. However, Sakichi never forgot about his California life, and in 1875 returned to San Francisco and opened one of the first Japanese restaurants in America. His wife Nami was tragically shot and killed in 1886, and he also lost his son. Sakichi was forced to raise his daughter alone. Sparing no expense or effort to ensure her success in America, he sent her to UC Medical School. In 1901, his daughter, Una Yanagazawa, became the first female Japanese-American graduate of a UC Medical School. Kuni Masamizu married Carrie Wilson in 1877. This portrait is believed to be from his wedding. They were a well-known couple in Coloma when they would walk down the streets. Carrie, a black woman, smoking her corncob pipe, her 6-foot figure towering above the shorter Kuni walking alongside her. The man in the foreground of this photograph is thought to be Matsunosuke Sakurai. Matsu remained after the end of the Wakamatsu colony and worked for 30 years on the Verkamp farm. He became a distribution manager, helping to sell Verkamp produce across the width of California. Matsu was the first of a score of Japanese-American pioneers who came to work on the surrounding farms and ranches at the turn of the last century. The building pictured in the background is possibly the old Verkamp farmhouse where Okei-san is believed to have died in 1871. Verkamp recollections and Japanese history suggest that Matsuno Sakurai was a samurai from Aizu who accompanied John Henry Schnell to safeguard the colony. Matsunosuke and Okei-san were taken in by the Verkamp family after the other Japanese had left. When Okei-san died in 1871, Matsu saved his funds for 15 years to purchase a lasting stone marker for her gravesite. He died in 1901, and the Verkamp family arranged for his burial at the top of a hill at the Coloma Pioneer Cemetery. The marker and gravesite had become lost until American River Conservancy volunteers learned of its location from a 93-year-old Verkamp descendant. In 2018, a ceremony was held to dedicate the new marker for this important Japanese-American pioneer.
This photo was taken by Mark Shigenaga. These are the most honorable guests at the Wakamatsu Festival 150. From the left, Iyahiro Tokugawa, the 19th descendant of the famous Tokugawa house. Chikemori Matsudaira, 15th descendant of the Matsudaira family, dressed to represent Lord Matsudaira Katamori, the last daimyo of Aizu. Aaron Gibson, descendant of Wakamatsu colonists Kuni Masumizu. Naori Shiraishi, descendant of Wakamatsu colonist Matsugoro Oto. Naori and her mother came from Japan to attend the festival. Penny Gibson, descendant of Kuni Masumizu. Barbara Johnson, mother of Aaron and Penny Gibson and a descendant of Kuni Masumizu.
One cannot talk about the Wakamatsu colony without mention of the Verkamp family. Neighbors at the time of the colony, they took in Okei-san at Matsunosuke after everyone, including Schnell, had abandoned the farm. In 1873, they purchased the land and began a farming dynasty that lasted for 140 years. Starting in 1915, when Japanese and Japanese-American investigators came to learn of the story, Henry Verkamp was there to show them Okei-san's grave and tell the Japanese that he knew and the fondness that he had for Okei. His recollections and newspaper articles are among the few first-hand accounts we know of the Wakamatsu pioneers. Along with Okei-san's grave, the kayaki tree, and the Grainer house, the banner and the sword are the most enduring reminders of the Wakamatsu colony. These items were left behind by John Henry Schnell when he and his family departed in 1871. They had been safely stored by the Verkamp family until 2001 when they were donated to California state parks. The beautiful silk banner, possibly given to Schnell by Lord Matsudaira to mark the new Aizu settlement, has the Matsudaira emblem in the center and crests of supporting clans at the corners. On the back side is the most important mon in Japan, the 16-petal chrysanthemum of the Emperor of Japan. California State Parks made a new case for this exquisite historic treasure so it could be displayed at important events in the future. In 1929, a group of distinguished visitors are pictured as Louis Verkamp and his sons display the banner and flag. One of the visitors is thought to be the son of Lord Matsudaira Katamori. Along with the banner, the ornate sword was left behind by John Henry Schnell. The tactical weapon possibly belonged to Schnell's samurai wife, Yo. Etchings on the blade reveal that it was made in 1354, likely by one of the era's finest swordsmiths.
This is the entrance to the upstairs of the Grainer house. This room pays tribute to the Grainer family, who built the house in 1852 and is set up to look similar to how one of the Grainer daughters might have had the room before they left for San Francisco around 1869, after it was sold to the Japanese colonists. This room is decorated in a Japanese style. It is not an authentic replica, but is more reminiscent of how the room might have looked when the Japanese occupied the Grainer house, which would be after 1869. This room pays tribute to the Verkamp family around the 1900s when they occupied the Grainer house after they purchased it from the Japanese. The sewing machine was found in one of the Descendants' garages and was brought here to its place of honor at the Grainer house.
The farmhouse also has a basement that was used by the Grainers as a winery. They made their fortune making and selling brandy and wine to the miners in Coloma. The basement stairs lead to a large open space that was probably used to store the bottles of wine. To the left, you enter the room where we believe the wine was made. There are barrels for aging and a chute, you could see it on the left of the sign, that leads to the basement from the outside. Probably this is the way they moved the fruit from the outside to the winemaking area. We are not sure how the Japanese colonists used the basement, but we suspect for storage. One new building just recently built is the small tea house. Though it is unlikely that colonists had such a building, they probably did practice a simple tea ceremony. In Japan, the samurai in particular practiced the art of tea, and they probably brought that tradition with them. The tea house was built with elements seen in more traditional tea houses. The doors of the house opened to face the trail Okei-san probably took to the small hill facing her home, and hopefully the inside gives one the feeling of peace and tranquility. Outside, surrounding the tea house, there are plans to create a meditative area with a garden of tea plants that is believed to be descendants to the plants brought by the colonists. Though the colonists were only successful in growing and harvesting the tea for 2 years, with new agricultural insights we hope to have better luck. We are also hoping to successfully grow mulberry trees. As we continue up towards Okei-san's grave site, we pass one of the oldest trees on the property.
Above the information kiosk towers a great blue oak tree. If the tree could speak, it could tell many stories of the Japanese colonists, the Veerkamp family, and before that, the Native Americans who walked beneath its branches. Oak acorns were a primary food source for the Native American people, the Nisenan, who made this land their home before the gold rush changed their lives drastically.
As we continue toward the gravesite, on the left, before reaching the site, is an important monument that was from the people of Aizu Wakamatsu.
In 2019, on the 150th anniversary of the colonists' arrival, a delegation from Aizu Wakamatsu came to dedicate this monument at the Wakamatsu farm. The kanji character Gi represents righteousness and loyalty in the Bushido Code of Honor. It was placed to honor the pioneers of 150 years ago who began a hopeful new life in a strange and promising new land. The monument represents the fulfillment of the promise made 150 years ago to bring Lord Matsudaira to the colony, with Gi expressing Aizu values such as loyalty, duty, and keeping one's promise. Even today in Japan, Aizu Wakamatsu has a reputation for its brave samurai spirit and commitment to be righteous under any circumstances. The monument was unveiled by the Honorable Matsudaira Chikamori, the 15th Aizu Matsudaira. This brings us to the story of Okei-san. Her family name was Ito. Okei-san was only 17 years old when she arrived here with the colonists in 1869. She came to serve as the nursemaid or nanny for the Schnell's 2 children, Francis and Mary. She was from a working-class family. Her father was a carpenter or barrel maker. It must have been hard for her to leave her home and family in Aizu Wakamatsu. Perhaps they believed she would have a better life in this new country because conditions in Aizu were extremely hard after the Civil War. Okei-san would have felt that it was her duty to do what she could to help in this effort to establish a colony for Lord Matsudaira. She was described as gentle, intelligent, and beautiful in her kimono. She spent her days working in the Schnell's household and caring for the children. But in only 2 years, the colony failed. The Schnells and Japanese colonists left, but Okei-san and the samurai Matsunosuke Sakurai remained here at Gold Hill. The Veerkamp family gave them both work and a home at their farmhouse. Okei-san helped look after the 6 Veerkamp sons, and Louisa Veerkamp taught her to bake and treated her like a daughter. It is said that in the evenings, Okei-san would climb up to this hill to watch the sun go down in the west towards her homeland. Later, in 1871, when Okei-san was 19, she caught a fever, perhaps cholera or malaria, and her spirit returned home. She was laid to rest at her favorite place on this hill. She was the first Japanese woman to die in the United States. Her memory was honored by Matsunosuke Sakurai, who made a trip all the way to San Francisco to buy the headstone that you see on her grave. It is in English on one side, and the inscription is in Japanese on the other side. In marking Okei-san's grave, Matsunosuke Sakurai likely preserved the story of the entire Wakamatsu colony. Without this gravestone, not only Okei-san's grave, but indeed the entire story of the first colony of pioneers from Japan might have been lost to history. But Okei-san's death was not the end of her story. Books, songs, and poems have been written about her. Her life story is one of honor and loyalty, qualities that Aizu Wakamatsu, known as the Samurai City, is famous for in Japan and beyond. On a mountaintop near Okei-san's hometown of Aizu Wakamatsu in Japan, there is an exact copy of this gravestone surrounded by engraved boulders telling the Wakamatsu colony story. The money to build that monument was raised by school children there. Her memory is treasured on both sides of the Pacific. We are very grateful to the Veerkamp family and American River Conservancy for preserving her legacy. Okei-san's grave is an iconic symbol of the history of Japanese immigration to the United States.
We hope you enjoyed your virtual tour today of Wakamatsu Farm. The preservation, protection, and restoration of this site is still an ongoing process. ARC has made a lot of progress restoring historic structures like our farmhouse, building accessible infrastructure like trails, and we've been hosting cultural festivals for the last several years. However, we want to do so much more. ARC is currently building an innovative environmental education center, working to restore more structures like the barn, and we're continuing to maintain and restore the natural resources on site. Behind me is our Donor Wall of Honor. Our Donor Wall of Honor captures the power of partnerships that has made this project possible for the American River Conservancy. Each one of these plaques represents a minimum of $1,000 in donations across our partnerships, and that's individuals, businesses, agencies, and organizations that are contributing. Our local elementary school had a penny drive to raise enough money for their plaque, and even the Consul General of Japan has made contributions. People from all over the world, all over our state, and from within our local community have jumped to support this site, and we think that speaks to the power of the story that we interpret here. The American River Conservancy is grateful for everybody who has supported this project with their money, their time, and their kind words. We are eager to continue sharing this site with others, so please check out the American River Conservancy's website and social media accounts for updates on public access, special events and rentals, and even environmental education opportunities for your local communities or schools.